Welcome to Warriors of the World. Today we'll be exploring the life of Bruce Lee, the martial artist who transcended cultural barriers and revolutionized martial arts forever. Subscribe now to join our community and support this project. Now, let's begin. San Francisco, November 27, 1940. As World War II raged across the globe, a child was born who would forever change martial arts. Bruce Lee, born Lee Junfan, came into the world at the Chinese hospital while his father, a Chinese opera actor, was touring the United States. His Chinese name, Junfan, means return again, reflecting his parents' desire for him to return to Hong Kong once the tour ended. Few know that Bruce was born in both the Year of the Dragon and the Hour of the Dragon, between 6 and 8 a.m., according to Chinese astrology, considered a powerful omen in traditional Chinese culture. Even more significant, he received a female name in his early years, Little Phoenix, an ancient Chinese practice to confuse evil spirits and protect especially valuable male children. His destiny as a warrior wasn't evident from the beginning. In fact, his first public appearance wasn't in a dojo but in front of a camera. At just 3 months old, Bruce debuted in the film Golden Gate Girl, 1941, playing a baby carried by his father. This early exposure to the entertainment world planted the seed for his future career as an action star. Unlike the idealized image of the perfect warrior, young Bruce was a sickly child with an unpromising physique. His mother, Grace Ho, from a wealthy Eurasian family, overprotected him due to his frequent illnesses. However, these initial physical limitations would serve as a catalyst for his later obsession with physical training and developing an efficient combat system that didn't rely solely on brute strength. Bruce's childhood unfolded in Hong Kong during a turbulent period. The city, devastated by Japanese occupation during the war and subsequently plunged into poverty and organized crime, provided the perfect crucible for forging his character. As he would confess years later, the Hong Kong of my youth was no place for the weak. I learned that to survive, I had to be strong, and to be strong, I had to know how to fight. The streets of 1950s Hong Kong were dominated by youth gangs, and young Bruce, with his rebellious and proud temperament, frequently found himself in street fights. One such confrontation would change the course of his life. After being defeated by a local gang, Bruce decided to seek a master who could teach him to defend himself properly. At age 13, he began training under the tutelage of Yip Man, Grand Master of Wing Chun, a kung fu style developed by a woman and adapted to counter the strength advantage of larger opponents. This choice wasn't coincidental. Bruce was notably thin and sought a system that would allow him to face physically superior adversaries. What many don't know is that his training was marked by controversy from the start. When Yip Man discovered Bruce had partially Western blood, his maternal grandmother was half German, many traditional students objected to his presence, considering him impure. This initial discrimination forged in Bruce an iron determination to prove his worth and, paradoxically, pushed him to question traditional martial arts dogmas. His training with Yip Man provided not only physical skills but a philosophical foundation. Wing Chun emphasizes economy of movement, tactile sensitivity, and adaptability, principles that would later become fundamental to Bruce's Jeet Kune. As he noted in one of his writings, Wing Chun taught me to feel rather than react, to flow rather than force. However, Bruce wasn't a traditional student. While others limited themselves to repeating forms, he constantly questioned, modified, and experimented. This irreverent attitude earned him both admirers and detractors. In his personal diary, he wrote, "I found that many masters are more interested in preserving their tradition than in discovering the truth about effective combat." A little-known incident marked his adolescence. At 15, he used his newly acquired skills to take revenge on a gang that had harassed one of his friends. The brutal efficiency with which he neutralized several attackers alarmed his parents about his growing involvement in street violence. This incident, while demonstrating his prowess as a fighter, convinced his father to send him back to the United States before his actions had irreversible consequences. Seattle, 1959. Bruce Lee lands in America with a personal mission: to complete his education and develop his own path in martial arts. Working as a dishwasher in a Chinese restaurant and later as a kung fu instructor, he financed his studies at the University of Washington, where he surprisingly chose to major in philosophy, not physical education as many would assume. This academic choice would reveal a crucial aspect of Bruce Lee that is frequently underestimated: his intellectual depth. Bruce devoured books on Western and Eastern philosophy, finding particular resonance in the writings of Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu and Indian thinker Jiddu Krishnamurti. However, it was his study of existentialist philosophy that would most influence his approach to martial arts, particularly Jean-Paul Sartre's maxim, "Existence precedes essence," which Bruce would reinterpret in his famous phrase, "Don't adapt to a style, let your style adapt to you." During this period, Bruce began synthesizing his own martial philosophy. He openly questioned the effectiveness of traditional styles with their ritualized movements and rigid codes. "Classical martial artists are like prisoners running in circles inside an extremely small cell," he wrote in one of his letters. This iconoclastic attitude would earn him powerful enemies in the traditional martial arts community. A rarely publicized episode occurred in 1964 when, challenged by traditional masters upset by his teaching to Westerners, Bruce accepted a behind-closed-doors confrontation. The combat, which according to witnesses lasted less than 3 minutes, ended with Bruce's quick victory. However, far from gloating, this confrontation led him to deep reflection. His victory had been harder than expected, and he recognized that his preparation had deficiencies. This incident catalyzed his obsession with physical conditioning. Contrary to the romantic image of the martial artist who only practices forms and techniques, Bruce became a pioneer of scientific training applied to martial arts. He experimented with muscle electrostimulation, advanced nutritional supplementation for his time, and training routines that combined elements of bodybuilding, Western boxing, fencing, and many other disciplines. His quest for maximum efficiency led him to experiment with performance-enhancing substances, a controversial aspect rarely mentioned by his biographers. Bruce consumed experimental protein compounds, high-dose ginseng, and according to some testimonies from close friends like Chuck Norris, occasionally amphetamines to maintain his exhausting training and work schedules. This facet reflects both his absolute determination and his willingness to explore any method to maximize his potential, regardless of the risks. The art of fighting without fighting. This paradoxical description reflects the essence of Bruce Lee's greatest contribution to the martial arts world, Jeet Kune Do, JKD. It wasn't simply a new style, but a martial philosophy that challenged the very notion of style as a limiting concept. The official birth of JKD occurred in 1967, but its genesis can be traced to a controversial duel that took place 3 years earlier in Oakland, California. Challenged by the traditional Chinese community, represented by Wong Jackman, Bruce accepted a private combat. Versions of this confrontation vary radically. According to some, Bruce won in minutes. Others claim it was an exhausting 20 to 25-minute battle. What's indisputable is the effect it had on Bruce. Although victorious, he was dissatisfied with his performance, considering that the fight had lasted too long. This ruthless self-criticism led him to question all his previous training. "I used too many classical movements, wasted energy on unnecessary techniques. The truth of combat is much simpler and more direct," he would write in his personal notes. This event precipitated Bruce's definitive break with traditional methods. He began systematically deconstructing everything he had learned, retaining only what demonstrated practical effectiveness. He incorporated elements of Western boxing, fencing, wrestling, judo, and even French savate, creating a revolutionary cross-cultural system for his time. The central principle of JKD reveals Bruce's advanced thinking: absorb what is useful, reject what is useless, add what is specifically your own. This philosophy of adaptability and constant evolution anticipated by decades the approach that dominates modern mixed martial arts today. A controversial aspect of JKD's development was Bruce's willingness to learn from unconventional sources. He maintained correspondence with professional boxers, sparred with karate champions, and even, according to some reports, visited underground gyms where no-rules fights were held to study street combat tactics. This immersion in the rawer aspects of combat alarmed many of his traditional colleagues. Even more controversial was his relationship with circles associated with the Chinese mafia and triads during this period. Although Bruce was never formally linked to these organizations, various testimonies suggest he informally trained members of these groups, possibly as a way to finance his research or establish protection networks. This connection, although tangential, would generate conspiracy theories after his death. Few warriors in history have taken physical development to the extremes Bruce Lee achieved. His transformation from a thin young man of 130 pounds to a perfectly defined combat machine of 160 pounds represents one of the most impressive self-discipline experiments ever documented. What many don't know is the obsessive scientific methodology behind his training. Bruce didn't just train, he meticulously researched every aspect of physical performance. His personal library contained over 200 books on anatomy, physiology, nutrition, and biomechanics. He kept detailed notebooks with annotations on every exercise, nutrient, and technique he experimented with on himself, essentially becoming his own human laboratory. His daily routine exceeded the limits of what was considered possible. He began at 6 a.m. with a 6-mile run, followed by weight sessions, thousands of repetitions of specific exercises for martial arts, and hours of technical training. According to his wife Linda, even his leisure moments became training opportunities. "I never saw Bruce watching television without simultaneously stretching or doing wrist or abdominal exercises." This dedication produced results that bordered on superhuman. His demonstrations of strength and speed seemed to defy the laws of physics. He could execute the famous one-inch punch, generating enough power to throw a 200-pound man several feet away, perform push-ups with 2 fingers, hold a horizontal position supported only by his forearms, and his legendary speed, documented in recordings where punches appear invisible to the human eye. However, the most controversial aspect of his physical transformation was his experimentation with performance-enhancing substances. Bruce constantly explored the limits of supplementation, using experimental protein compounds, concentrated herbal extracts, and according to testimonies from close friends like James Coburn, occasionally more potent substances like cannabis and amphetamines to increase his endurance during intense training periods or during film shoots. The price of this transformation was high. Bruce suffered constant pain, debilitating muscle spasms, and recurring injuries. A serious incident occurred in 1970 during weight training, when he severely damaged the 4th sacral nerve in his back. Doctors warned him he might never practice martial arts again, sentencing him to absolute rest for 6 months. Bruce responded by creating his own rehabilitation protocol and, defying all prognosis, not only recovered but returned stronger. "I don't want to play the role of a Chinese in Western films. I want to show the world what Chinese martial arts really are." With this declaration of intent, Bruce Lee began his assault on the Hollywood film industry, a battle that would prove as challenging as any of his physical confrontations. His first significant foray into the American entertainment industry came with the role of Kato in the television series The Green Hornet, 1966 to 1967. Although technically a supporting role, Bruce stole every scene with his explosive kung fu demonstrations, introducing them for the first time on American television. What the audience didn't know was that Bruce deliberately disobeyed directors' instructions, who asked him for slower and more theatrical movements. "If I can't show real speed and power, I'm betraying my art," he responded. This attitude, though artistically justifiable, earned him a reputation for being difficult in Hollywood. Several producers considered him too intense and unwilling to compromise his vision, a perception aggravated by the racial tensions of the era. A revealing episode occurred when he was considered to star in the series Kung Fu, only to be rejected in favor of David Carradine, a Caucasian actor with no martial arts experience. This rejection, partly motivated by racial prejudice, deeply hurt him. Frustrated by the limitations imposed in America, Bruce made a risky decision: to return to Hong Kong, where he had surprisingly gained fame thanks to The Green Hornet. What began as an exploratory visit became a cultural phenomenon when Raymond Chow, producer at Golden Harvest, offered him the starring role in The Big Boss, 1971. The film, shot on a minimal budget in Thailand, became an unprecedented success, breaking all box office records in Asia. What many ignore is that during the filming of The Big Boss, Bruce had conflicts with elements of local organized crime. According to crew testimonies, members of Thai triads attempted to extort the production, demanding payments for protection. Bruce, contrary to what his cinematic image would suggest, advocated for a diplomatic resolution, personally negotiating with the leaders of these organizations. However, when threats were directed at him specifically, he responded with an intimidating physical demonstration that has become legend among Asian martial arts circles. While his star was meteorically rising in the film firmament, Bruce Lee faced growing pressures and threats that remained invisible to the public. The massive success of his films in Asia had altered the balance of power in Hong Kong's film industry, creating powerful enemies. A rarely discussed aspect is his confrontation with Shaw Brothers Studios, then the dominant cinematic empire in Asia. When Bruce rejected their initial offer to return to Hong Kong, opting for Golden Harvest, an emerging studio, he unleashed a behind-the-scenes power war. According to Raymond Chow, Bruce's producer, they received veiled threats and experienced minor sabotage during productions, from inexplicable equipment problems to difficulties hiring technicians. More dangerous was his complicated relationship with the Hong Kong triads. Chinese criminal societies traditionally maintained strong links with the film industry, providing financing, protection, and services such as extras for mass scenes. Bruce's refusal to pay certain courtesy fees and his insistence on keeping his productions free from criminal influence provoked significant tensions. The stress of these external threats added to the immense professional pressures. Bruce was simultaneously developing multiple projects, including Game of Death, his ambitious cinematic manifesto about Jeet Kune. His legendary perfectionism led him to rewrite scripts, redesign choreographies, and work grueling days that pushed his body to the limit. To maintain this frantic pace, Bruce turned to stimulants, including powerful painkillers to combat chronic pain and, according to some sources, occasionally amphetamines to extend his productive hours. Linda Lee Cadwell, his widow, would acknowledge years later, Bruce believed he could perfectly control any substance he ingested, in the same way he controlled every muscle in his body. This excessive confidence was perhaps his only blind spot. The pressures weren't just physical but also emotional. Bruce experienced frequent episodes of insomnia and anxiety, exacerbated by the monumental expectations he had generated. As he confided to his friend Sterling Siliphant, "When you're at the top, everyone expects every move to be perfect. There's no room for error." Hong Kong, July 20, 1973. The martial arts and film world would be paralyzed by the news. Bruce Lee, just 32 years old, had suddenly died. The circumstances of his death, initially confusing and later shrouded in controversy, would generate one of the greatest mysteries in the entertainment world. The official version describes Bruce visiting actress Betty Ting Pei's apartment to discuss her participation in Game of Death. After complaining of a headache, he accepted an analgesic, Equagesic, a combination of aspirin and meprobamate, and lay down to rest. He would never wake up. The official forensic report attributed his death to cerebral edema, apparently caused by an allergic reaction to the medication. However, numerous elements suggest a more complex narrative. First, the decision to transfer his body from Betty Ting's apartment to the hospital through Raymond Chow, instead of immediately calling an ambulance, generated suspicions of a cover-up. Second, the presence of cannabis in his system, initially denied but later confirmed in the toxicological analysis, suggested a more complex picture of pharmacological interactions. More disturbing still was Bruce's physical state in the months prior to his death. He had lost approximately 20 pounds, suffered recurring dizziness, and had experienced a collapse during the dubbing of Enter the Dragon in May of the same year, just 2 months before his death. The doctors who attended him then diagnosed cerebral edema but couldn't clearly identify the underlying cause. These facts provided perfect fuel for conspiracy theories that persist to this day. The most persistent involves the Hong Kong triads. According to this theory, Bruce would have been assassinated via slow-acting poison or a death touch, dim mak, for refusing to pay protection or for revealing martial arts secrets traditionally reserved for Chinese students. The recent declassification of FBI documents revealed that the agency effectively investigated possible connections between Bruce's death and criminal organizations, though without definitive conclusions. Another theory points to Kung Fu traditionalists, who saw Bruce as a traitor for teaching Westerners and for his open criticism of traditional styles. Bruce himself had commented to his wife about threats received from conservative masters who considered his approach a heresy against centuries-old traditions. Bruce Lee's death, far from silencing his message, amplified his figure to mythological dimensions. The posthumous release of Enter the Dragon catapulted his name to unprecedented global fame, initiating a cultural phenomenon that would transcend film genres, national borders, and entire generations. What few understand is the magnitude of the Kung Fu boom that followed his death. Between 1973 and 1979, more than 500 martial arts films were produced trying to capitalize on his legacy. A subgenre even emerged called Bruceploitation, where actors like Bruce Lee, Bruce Liu, and Bruce Lee shamelessly imitated his image. These productions, though artistically questionable, demonstrated the global hunger to fill the void left by the true dragon. The martial arts industry experienced a radical transformation. Before Bruce Lee, there were approximately 3,000 karate and kung fu schools in the United States. 5 years after his death, that number had exceeded 20,000. Martial arts previously unknown in the West became accessible to the general public, inspired by his philosophy of intercultural openness. Even more significant was his impact on the representation of Asians in Western media. Bruce was the first Asian man to star in a Hollywood production and be presented as a sexual hero and action figure, breaking limiting stereotypes that had dominated for decades. As Asian-American actor and director Justin Lin noted, "Before Bruce Lee, our options were to be the servant, the villain, or the caricature. He gave us the possibility to be heroes." In the realm of competitive martial arts, Bruce's influence is incalculable. The concept of eclectic combat that JKD promoted anticipated by decades the rise of mixed martial arts, MMA. Foundational figures like Dan Inosanto and Richard Bustillo preserved and expanded his teachings, influencing elite fighters like Anderson Silva, who frequently cites Bruce as his main inspiration. 5 decades after his death, Bruce Lee remains a transcendental figure whose influence has surpassed the limits of cinema and martial arts to infiltrate global culture. His image appears on t-shirts, tattoos, and murals from Los Angeles to Beijing, and his philosophy continues to inspire new generations who never saw him alive. The most fascinating aspect of the Bruce Lee myth is its continuous evolution. Each decade reinterprets his legacy according to its own cultural needs. In the 70s, he was the action hero who broke racial barriers. In the 80s, the icon of physical perfection. In the 90s, the mystical philosopher. And in the 21st century, the disruptive innovator who challenged established power structures. Controversies about his death continue to generate interest. Recent investigations suggest alternative hypotheses, from hypersensitivity to certain pharmaceutical compounds due to an uncommon genetic mutation, to an undiagnosed heart condition exacerbated by his extreme training regimen and the use of stimulants. A 2018 documentary presented evidence that Hong Kong's excessive heat, combined with the absence of air conditioning in Betty Ting's apartment and the effects of cannabis, could have contributed to a fatal heat stroke. However, these scientific explanations haven't diminished conspiracy theories. In 2018, declassified documents revealed that the CIA had maintained a file on Bruce, monitoring his connections to Chinese nationalist groups and his cultural influence. This has fueled theories that Western intelligence agencies might have been involved in his death, fearful of his growing influence as a Pan-Asian icon during the Cold War. Whatever the truth about his death, what's indisputable is the historical transcendence of his life. Bruce Lee fundamentally transformed 3 industries: action cinema, commercial martial arts, and physical training. He introduced Eastern concepts of fluidity, adaptability, and economy of movement into the Western lexicon, while simultaneously liberating Asian martial arts from rigid traditions that limited their evolution. As Shannon Lee, his daughter, reflected, "My father lived only 32 years, but his impact has lasted for generations. I believe this is because he wasn't just an exceptional martial artist or movie star. He embodied a living philosophy of self-improvement and authentic expression that resonates universally." The warrior who once declared, "Be water, my friend," continues to flow through global culture, adapting and transforming as he inspires millions to break their own limitations. In a world obsessed with categories and labels, Bruce Lee continues to remind us that true mastery transcends all forms. Subscribe now, become a member, turn on notifications, share this video with your friends, and leave a comment so we can compare our knowledge and sources. Thank you for following our channel. Until our next combat, here at Warriors of the World.